I was 9 years old the first time he tied me to the bed. He didn't scream, he didn't raise his hand in warning. He just looked at me with that quiet, hollow stare and said one word, "Lie down." The way he said it made my knees weaken. I had just dropped a glass of water. That was it. It shattered on the tiled floor, and I froze, already feeling the weight of fear settle on my chest, like it always did when something broke or spilled or went wrong. He walked in with a rope already in his hand, like he had been waiting for this. Like this wasn't a reaction, but a ritual, something he had rehearsed in his mind 100 times. The bed was old, made of heavy wood that creaked even when you breathed too hard near it. He pushed me down onto it with one hand, his grip tight on my shoulder. I remember the texture of the blanket, rough and dusty, and the smell of dampness mixed with sweat. He didn't speak again, just looped the rope around my wrists and pulled. Hard. The knots bit into my skin, burning. I gasped, not from pain, but from confusion. I still thought this was punishment, a lesson, that if I cried enough or begged loud enough, maybe he would stop. Maybe he would remember I was his daughter. He left me there, tied to the bed, didn't say another word. The television in the other room was playing loudly. I could hear the canned laughter of some sitcom every few minutes. It felt wrong. That something so ordinary could exist in the same house where I was trapped and shivering and crying silently into an old pillow. Hours passed. My arms went numb. My stomach growled so loud it scared me. The only time the door opened again, it was my mother. She looked at me, just looked. Then she turned and walked away. I remember the sound of her slippers against the floor as she disappeared back into the kitchen. I wanted to scream her name, but my voice didn't come. It stayed stuck somewhere deep in my chest, under the shame. Back then, I still thought my mother loved me. She had soft hands and used to braid my hair before school. She used to sing while washing dishes, songs about saints and angels and mercy. I held on to those memories like life rafts while I lay there, waiting to be untied, waiting for mercy. But mercy didn't live in that house. Only silence did. I spent the night like that, tied and cold. The rope had rubbed my skin raw. My mouth was dry. I wanted to go to the bathroom but couldn't. I wet myself out of fear and shame and cold. I cried without tears because my body was too tired to produce them. I heard footsteps outside the door and prayed it was her again. Maybe this time she would help me. Maybe this time she would say sorry. But it wasn't her. He came back. He didn't speak. He untied one wrist, only to retie it tighter. He was calmer this time, as if this was normal, as if tying up a little girl and leaving her in her own filth was just part of being a father. He adjusted the ropes, checked the knots like someone checking tent lines before a storm. I wanted to ask why, but I didn't, because I already knew the answer. I was being broken, not punished, broken, and I couldn't even tell where the bruises started anymore because everything hurt. Today, people call me Miss Maria. I sell candy outside my house in a small town in southern Texas. People smile at me when they walk by. They say I have kind eyes and a peaceful voice. Children wave and I wave back. No one sees the girl who used to count the cracks in the ceiling to distract herself from the pain. No one knows that I still sleep with my arms pressed to my chest, because the memory of being stretched and tied still lives inside my muscles. They don't know that for years I believed it was my fault, that maybe I really was dirty, that maybe I really had provoked him, the way my mother once whispered when she thought I was asleep, that maybe the reason she didn't help me was because she thought I deserved it. These thoughts burrowed into my mind like insects, crawling into every part of who I was, until I forgot what it felt like to be innocent. He told me once that I needed to be taught how to behave, that girls like me had to be tamed. He said this as he tied my legs down, one knee at a time, his hands moving with precision and calm, like this was just another household chore, like I was a thing to be fixed. I remember the pressure of the rope on my ankle bone, the burn, the way the blood stopped flowing and made my feet cold. I remember how he looked at me afterward, not with anger but with satisfaction. like I was now exactly what he wanted me to be. Quiet, still, defeated, and I was. I stopped talking for a while after that. At school, I barely opened my mouth. I did my work in silence. The other kids called me weird. One girl asked me why I always looked like I was about to cry. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because if I started to speak, the truth might spill out, and I didn't know who would catch it. I didn't know if anyone would believe a little girl who smelled like fear and kept bruises hidden under long sleeves. I would watch other children run during recess, laughing like their lives weren't on fire, and I would wonder how it felt to run without pain, to laugh without guilt, to be hugged without flinching. No one ever tells you how abuse teaches your body to respond before your mind does, how your hands will start shaking even before your brain realizes it's afraid, how a soft voice can sound like a threat, how kindness can feel like a trap. I learned that young, too young. In that room tied to that bed, I stopped being a child. I became a survivor, not by choice, but by necessity. There are moments I still taste the dust from that blanket, still feel the sting on my wrists when I stretch too far, still hear his voice telling me to lie still. But I'm not still anymore, not inside, not where it matters. And yet, even now, after all this time, I sometimes catch myself listening for the sound of his footsteps, not because I think he'll come back, but because some echoes never really fade. The second day was worse because I understood. I understood that what was happening wasn't a punishment, it was permission. Permission granted by silence, by stillness, by the sound of a plate being set down without a word. That morning, after spending the night tied to the bed, soaked in my own urine, my wrists raw from struggling, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, familiar. It was my mother. She stood at the doorway, holding a plate. I could see the steam rising from the food. Scrambled eggs, white rice, and sausage. I remember the smell more than the taste, because I never got to eat it. He took the plate from her. She handed it to him like it was any other morning, like he was just a husband waiting for breakfast. She didn't look at me. She didn't say my name. She didn't ask why I was still tied to the bed, or why I was trembling, or why the rope was cutting into my skin. She turned around and walked away, her slippers brushing the floor like ghosts. I didn't cry when she left. I couldn't. My throat was too dry, my body too tired. But something inside me cracked, something deeper than bone, something that had once trusted her. That day, I started learning the difference between a mother who is afraid and a mother who chooses not to see. My mother wasn't a prisoner. She had her keys. She could walk out of that house any time. She cooked, cleaned, went to church. She smiled at neighbors. She made excuses for him that I wasn't old enough to understand. That day, I stopped hoping she would save me. Later, when I had loosened the ropes just enough to shift slightly on the bed, he came in and found the knots out of place. He didn't speak. He just stared at me with that calm fury, the kind that never yelled. He retied the knots tighter. My hands turned purple. My ankles throbbed. He left again, locking the door behind him. I could hear the clatter of dishes in the kitchen, her humming. She was making lunch. The second time she entered the room, I was bleeding. He had whipped me with the belt again, this time with the metal buckle. It tore the skin on the back of my thighs. The blood had soaked into the sheet. I thought she would scream. I thought, finally, this is too much. But she didn't scream. She carried a bucket with a wet cloth and bent down without a word. She wiped the blood like it was wine spilled on a table. She avoided my eyes. When I flinched under her touch, she whispered coldly, "You have to stop provoking him." Then she walked out, taking the bucket with her. I didn't understand those words back then. Provoking, as if I had asked for it, as if my mere existence was a threat to him. I didn't have breasts yet. I still wore underwear with cartoon animals. I was a child, and yet she made me feel like I was already guilty, like my body was a weapon I didn't know I was carrying. In the years that followed, I spent hours wondering what kind of woman she had been before him. If she had dreams, if someone had hurt her too, if somewhere along the line She had learned to survive by surrendering. But no matter how many excuses I tried to make for her, I couldn't forget the way she looked at me that day. Not with sorrow, not with guilt, but with annoyance, like I had made her life more difficult by bleeding too much. My father never said sorry. He never explained, but he didn't need to. My mother's silence was his language. Every time she folded his clothes, cooked his meals, stood next to him in public pretending everything was fine, she was giving him the permission he needed. He didn't have to hide. She hid for him. When I began to menstruate, he became more careful. Not less violent, just more methodical. He would ask her to prepare towels. Sometimes she would leave them at the foot of the bed. She never asked why, or maybe she did once, and he told her, and she accepted. I used to stare at those towels for hours, memorizing the patterns in the fabric, because it helped me escape my body. I'd imagine I was the flower stitched on the edge of the cotton, lying still, untouched, quiet. One night, after a particularly bad episode, my mother came in to clean again. I had been screaming for what felt like hours. My voice was hoarse. My legs were numb. The sheets were stained in blood and sweat. She said nothing. She just cleaned. I watched her face as she scrubbed the mattress. There was no emotion, no urgency, just a blank stare and mechanical hands. She looked more like a housekeeper than a mother. At one point I whispered, "Please stop him." She paused. Not for long, just a second. She looked at me then, really looked, and I saw it. A flicker of something. Fear maybe, or guilt, or regret. But whatever it was, it disappeared. She stood up and said, "You're going to ruin him, don't you see that?" That night, I realized something that still haunts me. She didn't see me as her daughter anymore. She saw me as a threat to him, to her life, to the illusion of peace she had built around their marriage. She had made her choice, and it wasn't me. I began to lose time after that. I'd stare at the ceiling and forget what day it was. Sometimes I imagined I was a different girl, in a different house, with a different mother, one who would have called the police, one who would have unlocked the door and wrapped me in a blanket and told me none of it was my fault. But that mother didn't live in my house. Mine lived behind closed eyes and sealed lips. She was a ghost during the day and a witness at night. People often ask how a mother could allow something like this to happen. I've asked myself the same question more times than I can count. I've spent nights lying awake, trying to find a reason that made sense. But there is no reason that justifies it, only choices. And she chose him. That's the truth I live with. Not just that he hurt me, but that she let him. And that, in some ways, she hurt me even more. Even now, when I walk through my house, I sometimes hear her voice, not calling me, not comforting me, but saying those same words. Stop provoking him, like a warning etched into my spine, like a curse passed down through blood. And I wonder if she ever looked at herself in the mirror and saw the monster she had become, or if she only ever saw the victim she pretended to be. 3 days. That is how long he kept me tied to the bed without food, without water, without letting me go to the bathroom. 3 days where the air in the room became sick with the smell of my own waste, dried sweat, and something darker that I could never find a name for. The room felt smaller with each passing hour. The walls seemed to pulse. The ceiling cracked slightly in one corner, and I stared at it until my eyes blurred. I lost count of the minutes. I lost count of the times I passed in and out of sleep. My body didn't feel like mine anymore. It belonged to him, to the ropes, to the silence that wrapped tighter than any knot. The first night was confusion. The second was agony. But the third was surrender. Not the kind that comes from weakness, but the kind that comes when survival is the only instinct left. My lips cracked from dryness. My legs burned from the chafing of the rope. The skin rubbed raw where the knot dug into my thigh. At some point I stopped crying. Tears took energy. I had none left. He came and went during those 3 days. Sometimes with a grin, sometimes without expression at all. I learned to hate the sound of the door hinges. It was the only warning I ever got. No words, no footsteps, just the creak of the wood and the feeling of cold air as he stepped inside. I could always smell him before I saw him. Sweat, tobacco, something metallic like rust or blood. He was never in a hurry. That was the worst part. He took his time like he was preparing a ritual. He would sit on the edge of the bed, sometimes silent for minutes, just watching me, like I was something he had built, something he owned. His fingers would trace the bruises, press into them. He would hum, sometimes gospel songs, sometimes old country music. It made everything more twisted, like he was at peace while I was slowly unraveling inside. The objects he used were never random. They were chosen, deliberate. One time he brought in the wooden handle of a mop. Another time, the remote control from the living room. He said words like discipline and correction, said I needed to be trained, that little girls with dirty thoughts had to be taught the rules of the house. He would quote verses from the Bible, twisting them into knives, saying that a child who disrespects her father deserves punishment, that obedience was holy. I didn't understand the words back then, but I understood pain, and I understood that he used God as a mask. The second day, I tried to escape. He had loosened the knot on my left hand just enough for circulation to return. My fingers tingled and swelled, but I could move them. I waited until nightfall, until the house was silent, then twisted my wrist against the rope, forcing the skin to tear. The pain was blinding. I bit into the mattress to muffle my screams. When I finally slipped free, I tried to slide off the bed, but my legs gave out beneath me. I fell hard. My head hit the floor. My vision spun. Still I crawled toward the door, dragged my body like an animal caught in a trap. I was inches away when it opened, and he was there, holding a plate of food, the same food my mother had cooked. He looked down at me and didn't say a word, just stepped over my body, placed the plate on the nightstand, and walked away. That silence was louder than a scream. It told me everything. He wasn't afraid of me leaving. He knew I had nowhere to go. He knew the door might as well have been made of steel. I crawled back to the bed myself. Later I realized that was part of it. He wanted me to come back, to submit, to prove to myself that there was no escape. The bed became my prison, the rope, my chain, but the real shackle was inside me, the belief that I didn't deserve more. By the third day, the hallucinations started. I saw shadows moving in corners. I heard voices whispering names I didn't know. My own name sounded foreign when I tried to remember it. My body burned with fever. My lips bled from dryness. I could taste the iron of my own blood every time I opened my mouth. I called out for my mother once, a whisper, a plea. She never came. When he returned again, he was calm. He brought a towel, a new rope, and a bottle of lotion, as if he was doing me a favor, as if comfort was part of the punishment. He cleaned the wounds on my wrists with the lotion. It stung so badly I jerked my whole body, but he held me still, shushed me like I was a child with a nightmare, told me I needed to heal fast so I could be ready again. There was something in his eyes that day that chilled me deeper than any wound, a kind of pride, like I had passed a test, like I had been reshaped the way he wanted, and I believed it, for a while. I believed I was broken beyond repair, that the world outside that room didn't want me, that even if I screamed loud enough, no one would hear, that my voice was small, worthless, just noise. At one point he fed me, held a spoon to my lips and waited. I was too weak to refuse. The food tasted like ash. I swallowed and cried and swallowed again, not because I was hungry, but because refusing would mean pain, and I had nothing left to give. He wiped my mouth with a cloth, whispered, "Good girl." I used to think monsters had sharp teeth and growled in the dark, but this monster smiled, said grace before meals, slept beside a woman who wore rosaries and perfume, my mother, his partner in this unholy house. The bed had deep scratches on the headboard where I had clawed at the wood. My fingernails had torn off one by one. I left pieces of myself in that room. Skin, blood, silence. I learned how to separate my mind from my body, to float above the pain, to become air. I still do it sometimes. When I hear certain songs, When someone touches me unexpectedly, I leave myself. There were times in those 3 days when I wished for death, not because I understood what it meant, but because anything had to be better than waking up to him. Anything had to be better than hearing my mother set the table while I bled in the next room. Even now, decades later, I can still feel the texture of that rope on my skin. I can still smell the mold in the mattress. I can still hear the silence in her footsteps as she passed by my door without stopping. People ask why I remember everything so vividly, and I say, you don't forget the place where your childhood died. You don't forget the room where God didn't answer. When I returned to school, my body was still sore and slow. Every movement reminded me that I was not healed. My legs ached from the burns where the ropes had dug in. My arms trembled each time I lifted them. Even breathing felt foreign, like my chest wasn't mine anymore. I sat at my desk with my back straight and my knees pressed together, not out of posture, but out of survival. I couldn't risk touching anyone. I couldn't risk being touched. The other children didn't notice right away. They talked about cartoons and recess and weekend birthdays. Their laughter echoed off the walls, and I felt like a ghost floating through a world I was no longer part of. I kept my head down. I didn't speak unless I was forced to. I couldn't concentrate on the blackboard. I couldn't focus on numbers or words. My mind was trapped in a room that still smelled of rope and blood. My teacher, Miss Elisa, was the only adult who saw something different. She was tall, with kind eyes, and a voice that never rose, even when the classroom was loud. She started to call on me less, not out of neglect, but out of caution, like she could sense that my silence wasn't laziness. One day, she asked me to help her carry books from the library. I followed her, moving slowly, carefully, each step reminding me of the damage still healing beneath my skirt. When we were alone, she asked if I was feeling all right. I nodded. She didn't press. She just looked at me a little longer than usual, like she was trying to read something beneath my skin. I avoided her gaze. Looking into her eyes made something inside me crack open. I didn't want to cry in front of her. I didn't want to be seen, but she kept noticing things. The way I flinched when someone touched my shoulder. How I never changed for gym class. The bruises on my knees that never seemed to fade. I once turned in a writing assignment that was supposed to be a fairy tale. Mine was about a little girl locked in a tower who screamed every night, but no one came. Miss Elisa returned it with no corrections. Just a sticky note that read, "Your words matter." That sentence haunted me, not because it was kind, but because I didn't believe it. My words hadn't mattered at home. My screams hadn't changed anything. My mother had heard them and kept stirring the pot on the stove. My words had been swallowed by walls. Still, I kept that note. I folded it carefully and hid it inside my pencil case, next to my erasers and broken crayons. It became a secret I carried, a whisper that maybe someone saw me. One afternoon we were lining up for lunch, and Miss Elisa reached for my hand to guide me forward. The moment her fingers touched mine, I yanked my hand back so fast I stumbled into the desk behind me. The classroom went silent. My heart thundered in my chest. I could feel everyone staring. Miss Elisa didn't scold me. She didn't ask questions. She just knelt beside me and said, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you." Her voice was soft, slower than usual. I remember that moment more vividly than any beating I ever received. After that, she began sending notes home to my mother. Short, polite messages. "Maria seems tired. Maria has trouble concentrating. Maria may need to see a counselor." But the notes never led to anything. My mother always signed them and sent them back. No comments, no follow-ups. She once told me, "That teacher of yours asks too many questions. You need to behave so she doesn't think we're a bad family." That was the language my mother spoke. Appearances. She didn't want help. She wanted silence. She wanted me to act normal so her life wouldn't unravel. I think that's why she cleaned the blood so carefully. Because stains meant truth, and truth meant consequences. At school, I began to see Miss Elisa watching me more closely. During recess, she sat near the fence while the other teachers talked among themselves. I knew she was waiting to see if I would speak, if I would break, But I couldn't, not yet. I wasn't ready to hear my own voice say what had been done to me. Saying it made it real, and if it was real, then maybe I was truly ruined. But there were small moments that built a bridge between us, like when she asked me to read to her after school while she graded papers, or when she let me draw on the chalkboard while the other kids packed up their bags. She created spaces where I didn't have to speak, but I could exist. I didn't understand it then, but she was giving me safety in the only way she could. There was a day when I sat in the nurse's office with a headache. I hadn't eaten breakfast, and the hunger made my stomach cramp. Miss Elisa brought me a granola bar and a juice box. When I took them, I whispered thank you. She smiled, but it was tight, sad. She knew that granola bar wasn't going to fix anything, but I think she just wanted me to know I wasn't invisible. Children are resilient, people say, but that word is used to dismiss the pain we carry. Resilience isn't a gift. It's a scar that forms over wounds that never had time to heal. At school, I smiled when I needed to. I raised my hand sometimes so they would stop asking questions. I answered roll call in a steady voice, even if my hands trembled beneath the desk. I learned how to blend in, how to disappear while sitting in plain sight. Miss Elisa gave me a journal once, just a small spiral notebook with pink flowers on the cover. She told the class we were starting a writing assignment, but I knew it was for me. I opened it that night and stared at the blank pages for hours. Then I wrote 3 words: he hurts me. I ripped the page out and burned it in the kitchen sink while my parents slept. The flames curled the paper quickly, turning the ink to ash. I watched it disappear and felt both relief and shame. I wasn't ready to let those words live outside of me. Not yet. But they lived in Miss Elisa's eyes. She never asked directly. She never crossed the line. But every kind gesture, every moment of silence she offered me was a question. And eventually, I would have to answer it. I just didn't know how. Not when I still slept with the light on. Not when I still woke up gasping from dreams that left my sheets soaked in sweat. Not when I still heard his voice whispering in the back of my head. I was still a prisoner even when the door was open. Miss Elisa didn't save me. Not that year, not with police, not with confrontation. But she planted something, a belief that maybe not all adults would look away, that maybe there was a world outside my house where pain wasn't normal, where I could speak and someone would listen. That seed took time to grow, years even, but it stayed because of her, because she saw a little girl sitting quietly at her desk and chose to look closer. And because of that choice, the silence inside me began to shift, just enough to let a crack form. And through that crack, the first light began to creep in. It happened on a night when my body had already given up. I was burning with fever. My skin was flushed and hot, my nightgown clinging to me soaked in sweat. I couldn't tell if the shaking in my hands came from the cold creeping in through the floor or the heat boiling inside me. The house was silent except for the ticking clock in the hallway. Each tick felt like a countdown, though I didn't know what for. I was too weak to cry. My throat was dry and cracked from days of keeping in screams. My lips had split open. My head pounded with every heartbeat. I remember the sound of his boots before he entered. Heavy, unrushed. I had learned to recognize that rhythm. There was never panic in his steps, never hesitation. He walked like a man who believed no one would stop him. And he was right. When the door creaked open, I didn't move. I didn't even look. My body had become a shell, a quiet, shivering shell that no longer knew how to resist. He didn't speak. He never did when it was at its worst. He just moved, pulled the blanket off with one hand and stared at my body, exposed, vulnerable, burning. I saw the moment he noticed the fever. His face twisted, not in concern, but in something darker. He touched my forehead. His hand was cold and rough, and I flinched out of reflex. That tiny movement made him smile. He said I was being punished, that the fever was my sin burning its way out, that God was using him to cleanse me. His words were soft, like a lullaby, but every syllable felt like a nail being driven into my skull. He left the room briefly and returned with a bucket of water, a towel, and the broom. The same broom my mother used to sweep the kitchen every morning. The one with the frayed red bristles and wooden handle worn smooth by years of use. He held it like a priest holds a relic, reverent, ceremonial. He tied my wrists again, though my body barely fought back. The rope scraped over old wounds, reopening the scabs that had tried to heal. He tied my ankles, forcing my legs apart. I tried to beg, but my voice was gone. All that came out was a dry rasp. He didn't care. He dipped the towel in the bucket and wiped my face gently. The same hands that had bruised my skin now moved like they were tending to a sick child. But the tenderness wasn't mercy, it was control. Then he picked up the broom handle. He didn't rush. He whispered prayers, Bible verses twisted into something monstrous. He said I needed to be purified, that he was driving the evil out. Every word made my stomach turn. I felt the wood press against me and then inside me. I tried to scream, but it came out as a whimper. My body shook, not from fear, but from fever and trauma. I bit down on the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. The pain was beyond anything physical. It was spiritual, like he was trying to erase me from the inside out. I must have passed out. When I woke, it was morning. Light was leaking through the curtains, soft and golden, like the world outside had no idea what had happened in that room. My legs were soaked in blood. My nightgown had been pulled back down, but it was stained and stuck to my skin. The ropes were gone, but the marks remained. And then she came in, my mother. She didn't gasp, she didn't scream, she didn't ask if I was alive. She walked in holding the same bucket of water, fresh this time. The steam rose from it, warming the morning air. She knelt beside me and began cleaning, slowly, quietly. Her hands moved as if she were washing dishes. No anger, no sadness, just duty. She wiped the blood from my thighs, soaking the cloth, wringing it out, then wiping again. I watched her. I didn't speak. My voice was still broken, but my eyes screamed at her. She never looked at me, not once. She finished, stood, poured the water down the drain, and returned with a clean towel. She laid it over my legs and said only one thing. You survived. That's all that matters. That sentence shattered something inside me, because it meant survival was all she expected of me. Not love, not protection, just endurance, just silence. I lay there for hours after she left. My mind replayed everything, again and again, until the memories started to feel separate from me, like they belonged to another girl, a girl who had died that night. I closed my eyes and tried to forget, but forgetting wasn't possible. The pain was a brand on my soul. I couldn't walk for days. When I finally stood, my knees buckled and my hands clutched the wall to keep from collapsing. I found blood on the sheets for weeks after. My body had changed. I could feel it, like something sacred had been torn from me and replaced with shame. I started sleeping with my clothes on. I stuffed the crack under the door with towels so no light could come in. I stopped talking altogether. At school, I kept my head down, flinched at every sudden noise. The other kids said I was weird, that I smelled funny, that I always looked like I'd been crying. But I didn't care. The night of the fever became the night I stopped believing anyone would help me. Not the neighbors who smiled at my mother, not the church ladies who complimented my dress, not the pastor who shook my father's hand and called him a man of faith. No one saw, and those who saw looked away. But my body remembered. It held the pain in every muscle. It held the shame in every step. I couldn't eat without feeling sick. I couldn't sleep without nightmares. I couldn't look at brooms without panic swelling in my chest. I once asked my mother why she let him do it. My voice was barely audible. She didn't answer. Just walked to the kitchen and started boiling water for tea. I stood there in the doorway, small, broken, waiting for anything. An apology, a lie, a tear. But there was nothing. When she finally spoke, she said, "If you stop fighting, it won't hurt so much." That was her truth, the way she had survived, by surrendering, by teaching me to do the same. But something inside me refused. Maybe it was the memory of Miss Eliza's eyes. Maybe it was the part of me that hadn't been fully silenced yet. Whatever it was, it began to stir. And in that stirring, a thought took root. Maybe I didn't have to survive like this forever. Maybe the girl inside me wasn't completely gone. Maybe even after all this, she could still find a way out. The day everything changed didn't start out any different. I woke up to the same silence, the same heaviness in my chest. My body still ached in places no one could see. The house smelled of coffee and fried eggs, and somewhere in another room, the television played softly like background noise in a nightmare. I sat at the kitchen table, small and quiet, chewing dry toast while my mother read a newspaper, her face a wall of indifference. My father wasn't home. I didn't ask where he was. I never asked anymore. But something inside me was different. It was small, fragile, almost invisible, but it was there, a flicker, a whisper. It came from a place deeper than pain, a place I had almost forgotten existed. It said, "Enough." Miss Eliza had slipped a folded note into my math book a few days earlier. She never said a word when she handed it to me, just pressed it between the pages and walked away. That afternoon when I opened it, I found just one sentence. "If you need help, write me a letter. I believe you." I sat in the back of the classroom for a long time, holding that note in my lap, not moving. My hands trembled, my heart pounded, and then I began to write. I didn't know how to say everything, so I wrote pieces, bits of memory like broken glass. He hurts me. My mother watches. I can't scream anymore. I don't want to die. I folded the paper as small as I could and placed it in the bottom of my pencil pouch. I carried it with me for 3 days before I had the courage to give it to her. I handed it to her during dismissal, right as the bell rang. I didn't wait for her to read it. I just walked away. 2 days later, the police came to our house. I was sitting on the porch when the car pulled up. The flashing lights weren't on, but I recognized the uniform. I froze. My legs wouldn't move. My fingers gripped the edge of the wooden steps so tightly that they turned white. My mother came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. She saw them and stepped in front of the door, said something I couldn't hear, tried to block their way, but it was too late. They walked past her, straight into the hallway, into my room. They saw the mattress with stains that had never fully washed out. They saw the ropes I hadn't touched in weeks. They saw the blood on the baseboard that no one had noticed. One officer knelt in front of me, asked my name. I whispered it. He asked if I was hurt. I nodded. He asked if I was safe, and for the first time in my life, I said no. I was taken to the hospital that night. I remember the lights being too bright, the paper sheet on the exam table too loud when I moved. Doctors spoke gently. Nurses held my hand. I didn't know how to react to kindness. I flinched every time someone touched me. But no one forced me to speak. They waited. They found lacerations, signs of repeated trauma, infections I didn't even know I had. They treated me like someone worth saving. I didn't understand that feeling at first. It felt like walking into a dream after a lifetime in a nightmare. They asked me questions I didn't want to answer, but I did, one at a time, slowly, through tears, through silence, through shaking, but I did. He was arrested within days. My mother too, for obstruction, for failure to protect, for everything she had refused to stop. I never saw either of them again. I was placed in a foster home at first. Then with an aunt I barely knew, who lived in another town. She was quiet, but kind. She gave me a room of my own, with a bed that smelled like lavender and a lamp with little stars on it. I slept for almost 2 days straight the first time I was there. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid to close my eyes. Healing is not simple. It doesn't come in a straight line. There were nights when I still woke up screaming, days when the smell of wood or the sound of boots made me freeze. I carried those years in my skin like ghosts. But little by little, I began to live. I went back to school. I started therapy. I learned that what happened to me wasn't my fault, that I didn't provoke it, that I wasn't dirty. I learned how to breathe again, how to walk without flinching, how to speak without fear. I learned to smile. I never forgot Miss Elisa. Years later, when I graduated high school, I wrote her a letter. I told her everything. I thanked her for seeing me when I was invisible, for believing me before I believed in myself. She never responded with words, but I know she cried when she read it. Some silences speak volumes. Today I am 63 years old. I live in a quiet neighborhood in southern Texas. I sell candy in front of my house. Children pass by and wave. Some sit with me on the steps and tell me about their day. I always listen, always, because I know what it means when no one does. People say I have a kind face, that my voice is calm, that I seem like someone who's never known pain. I smile when they say that, because I have known pain more intimately than most people ever will. But I have also known freedom, the kind that doesn't come from running but from surviving, from telling the truth, from letting the light back in little by little. To anyone who's listening, who's watching this and wondering if their story matters, if they'll ever be heard, I want you to know something. You are not alone. Your pain is real. Your story is valid. And even in the darkest silence, someone might be watching. Someone might be waiting for you to speak. Sometimes it only takes one letter, one whisper, one brave moment. Thank you for staying with me until the end. If my voice reached your heart, if this story moved something inside you, I invite you to continue this journey with me. The next video is right there on your screen. I'll be waiting for you.